The immediate question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I look forward to the sporting analogies from the member for Boothby.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't think I could match the eloquence of the member for Bennelong on the Olympic silver diving medalist. I do welcome the opportunity to speak on the Migration Legislation Amendment, Offshore Processing and Other Measures Bill 2011. It's an important issue. It's an important piece of legislation. This is a debate about protecting our borders and protecting the rights of those seeking asylum. And the sad thing about this debate is that it has taken 5 years of policy failures, almost 5 years of policy failures and failures by the government to secure our borders to come to this point. We've seen in this area policy failure after policy failure when it comes to border protection in the manner to which we've become accustomed with the government. Their position on border security has flip-flopped, and there's nothing more disconcerting to the Australian people than seeing an Australian government just flip-flopping in the area of national security and border protection. Over the past 10 years, Labor have supported turning back the boats, they've opposed turning back the boats. They've supported offshore processing, they've opposed offshore processing. They've supported temporary protection visas, they've opposed temporary protection visas. Now, I've spoken about this before, but one of the problems with what the Labor government did was once they started to unpick the border protection regime which the Howard government left in place, the whole thing began to unravel. And what they did was put the people smugglers back in business. There aren't many businesses which have thrived under this government, but the people smuggler business has. They proved that they were a soft touch on border protection. The boats started arriving, and for a long time the government was in denial that there was even a problem. Since the government took office with their intention to abolish the Howard government's border protection measures, 22,518 people have arrived on 386 boats. And tragically, over that time, more than 1,000 people have lost their lives on their journey. In fact, we heard news last night of another boat with 71 passengers. Now, I've been around long enough, I can remember the current Prime Minister saying, when she was the immigration spokesperson for the Labor Party, another boat, another policy failure. Well, we've had 386 boats and 386 policy failures. Under the Howard government, this program cost less than $100 million, and it now has blown out to more than $1 billion under the current government. The government's failure to manage our borders has cost taxpayers an extra $4.7 billion since they abolished the Coalition's proven border protection measures. Now, most governments find problems and create solutions. This government found a solution and created a problem. It doesn't just stop there. They incompetently managed the Oceanic Viking standoff, their failed freeze on asylum seeker processing, their announcement of the East Timor solution before they'd even asked East Timor if they would participate. But the government's latest failing, their most significant failing regarding border security, was their 5-for-1 Malaysia people swap. It was another border protection failure from an incompetent government. The Malaysian people swap solution was condemned by both Houses of Parliament and struck down by the High Court, and yet they persisted with it. Now, one of the fundamental responsibilities for any Australian government is to protect our borders. And it is just its core business for an Australian government, managing the economy, managing national security, managing our borders. Now, it was only when the Prime Minister was forced to delegate this responsibility to an expert panel 6 weeks ago that things changed. The government were forced to delegate their responsibility to an expert panel because they did not have a border protection policy which worked. They didn't know what they believed in anymore, and they didn't know what to do. The expert panel has recommended substantially what the Coalition had in place and what the Coalition has been recommending for years. For 4 years, the Prime Minister has said that offshore processing on Nauru would not work. This solution was not good enough for the government 6 weeks ago when the Coalition proposed it, but it is good enough for them now. The Houston panel made 22 recommendations, including offshore processing on Nauru and Manus Islands, the fact that turning boats around can be operationally achieved, and that the protections under the government's Malaysia solution were inadequate. Now, unlike the flip-flops from the government, when it comes to managing our borders, the Coalition has had a clear and consistent, tried and tested policy on border protection for more than a decade. It's a policy that has 3 elements at its core. Firstly, turning back the boats when the circumstances permit, and more importantly, when it is safe to do so. Secondly, offshore processing in a third country, namely Nauru, subject to clear human rights protections consistent with our obligations. And thirdly, temporary protection visas for those who are found to be genuine refugees that denies access to the family reunion program. It's a set of policies that's been proven to work. They worked then and they will work now. Between 2002 and 2007, over the last 5 years of the Howard government, on average, less than 3 boats per year arrived in our waters. The Coalition policies put the people smugglers out of business. And under this government, the only business which has thrived is the people smuggler business. Reopening Nauru and Manus Island is not the entire solution to stopping the boats, but it's one part of the Coalition's plan to stopping the boats. The government's decision to implement the Houston report and reopen Nauru and Manus Island is a humiliating backdown to a long list of policy failures, a long list of backflips, but it is the prudent thing to do. Therefore, we will be supporting the legislation.